Hello and welcome back to the Just Fantasy Baseball podcast. We have a very exciting show today. Rami is unfortunately out, and that's not why it's exciting. It's exciting because of who we replaced him with. His name is Nate Miller. Nate and I recently did an NFBC draft together, and it actually just kind of worked out that we were in the same draft together. Didn't really plan on doing that, but Nate also writes for Just Baseball, and thought it'd be great to have him on and kind of talk about the draft a little bit. So before we get started talking about the draft, Nate, can you bring us in about yourself? Tell us a little bit about who you are, what your background is in fantasy baseball, fantasy sports, writing. Take a few minutes and just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on, Vince. As he said, I am Nate Miller. I've been around the fantasy industry going back over a decade now. That makes me feel old and dated, but I keep it fresh with the rankings and everything else. I work for Fantasy Pros right now. I've worked for places like Fantasy Alarm, RotoWire in the past, and I'm new to the Just Baseball fantasy writing team. But I've got a couple of new articles over there over the last couple of weeks, and I've got one coming up later this week, probably out by the weekend, talking about some late round starting pitchers, which uh, it kind of got me in the mindset was the way my draft here went in the TGFBI leagues this year.
How many drafts are you in again? I think you had mentioned it right before, but how many did you do this year?
This is the only one I've done so far. Most of mine are coming later as we're trying to get closer up to that opening day. Maybe so. I've got a home league. I've got a couple other drafts coming up, but they're all about a week out from now. So this is the one I've got right now, and I'll play in just 4 leagues this year. That's a low for me over the last couple of years.
Well, your quality of league is spectacular. The quality of your work is spectacular from what I've seen. The very little I've seen, I'm excited to dive into it a little bit more. But I'm also excited to pick your brain now. The first thing I want to ask about the draft, and I didn't really preface this with you too much, so I'm sorry if it's a little bit of a shocking question, but I think it's important. You picked in the 14th spot. So this is a 15-team draft, and you picked in the 14th spot. Can you walk me through the pre-draft strategy? So for anyone who doesn't know, in this league, you can pick your waiver order on where you would like to pick in the draft. And so, Nate, I'm curious, where did you want to pick? Is 14 where you wanted? Where did that kind of fall on your priority list as far as draft spots go?
Sure. It's actually comes up pretty high. I don't want to divulge too much. I mean, everybody's got different
Sure. Oh, sure,
strategies when
sure.
it
Right.
comes to ranking those waiver or the draft spots, but I do put it pretty high. I tend to look at what are how far will I get? Like, who are the maybe 4 or 5, maybe 6 guys that I would absolutely take if I had one of those top 4 or 5 picks. So I believe this year I had 4 guys in mind. So I go 1 through 4, and then I like to be close to the turn. I don't like the middle rounds because I like to get 2 players as close together as I possibly can. So then I'll turn around and go back and say, okay, well, I want 14th or 15th. So I actually fell into one of my preferred spots, and the way my first couple of picks went, um, I'm actually pretty happy with that. It's the way some of the things played out later, particularly like I already alluded to in the regards to pitching that got a little messy for me.
Sure. And I mentioned to you too right before we started. So, most places and NFBC is no different. They do post draft analysis, right? And they tell you, oh, this is where your team's going to end up. So I ended up with the 14th out of 15th best team according to this analysis, and Nate ended up with the 13th out of 15th. So
Yeah, we
I think
killed.
that, yeah, we did great, right? That speaks to a few things. I think that speaks to strategy, right? Just depending on the strategy, I think, at least for me, I took some risks towards the back half of the draft. And, that's probably why I had to reach for a lot of guys. And, I'm sure that kind of drags that kind of stock down a little bit, but I'm perfectly happy with most of my draft. There's some picks that I think I'd like to take back as well that we'll talk about. But let's just start with the first half here. So I will start off by reading your first 15 picks, and then I'll read my first 15 picks, and then we can dive into just what were some values that you thought were good values or good picks, and then we'll do the opposite. Were there any that you didn't like? And we'll go from there. Sound good?
Sure.
All right, cool. So You went in the first round. You took Matt Olson and on the turn Jose Ramirez. So 1-2 there. Adolis Garcia at 3, Max Fried in the 4th round, Yuri Perez in the 5th. Then 6 through 10, you went Andres Munoz, Alexis Diaz. So double tap on relievers there. And then 8 was Spencer Steer, 9 Edgar Julian, and then 10th Jaron Duran. 11, you went Asturio Ruiz. 12, you went Eduardo Rodriguez. 13, Nathan Eovaldi. 14, Mitch Garver. And then 15, Carlos Estevez. And then as for myself, I picked out of the 8 spot, which was actually my second preference. I kind of like being in the middle, contrary to a little bit of your belief. Sometimes I like being in the middle. When I'm on the turn, I feel like the picks are so far away sometimes, and I like to be able to nitpick here and there. And I lose out on a few guys, but I ended up, my first pick was Fernando Tatis. 2, I went Corbin Burns. 3, Bo Bichette. 4, Josh Hader. And then 5, Logan Gilbert. 6 through 10, I went Kyle Schwarber, Christian Walker, Bryson Stott, Cal Raleigh, and then Merrill Kelly. And then 11 through 15, I went Jake Berger, Jose Barrios, Stephen Kwan, Aaron Savali, and Jose Leclerc. So, Nate, talk us through some of those first few picks or those first 15 picks. Which one did you like, or which ones were you really stoked about? Just start there and tell me what you thought.
Getting Matt Olson, not to be too much of a homer, I am a lifelong Atlanta Braves fan, but um, at 14 with the season he's coming off of, maybe he matches it, maybe he doesn't. Probably a bit lofty to match exactly what he did, but that really shores you up in the home runs and RBIs category. And then Jose Ramirez, which I have to say, we've seen the last couple of years, he's pretty much been a top 5 pick pretty exclusively everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Coming all the way down, let's say that would be pick 17. That's too much value for me. I mean, you're talking about a guy you can pretty much rely on for 25, decent batting average. And maybe the Cleveland lineup gives him enough RBIs and run scoring. But even if it doesn't, it's more about the high floor with him. And it's more about the high upside with Matt Olson. And that gives you a good offensive foundation right there. I think Adolis Garcia coming back is another. People see that batting average, and then the steals did drop off a little last season, but the Rangers lineup is so good, so deep. I wanted a part of that. And then it's pretty much where the pitchers start going, and you have to jump into some. So with Fried, as much as I love Max Fried being a Braves fan, I'm a little concerned about him coming off the injury, but I still think it, coming in the 4th round in a 15-team draft, that's still pretty good. He'd been pretty healthy leading into last season, and even when he was on the mound last season, very good. Yuri Perez is not a guy I was really targeting. I thought he would go a little bit higher with things I had been seeing and hearing from others around the industry. But when he was there, it was kind of like, I think he's the best pitcher available, and I want to double up on starters here because I'm just getting my first 2. So that was my thought process with the first 5. And then with, like you said, I took 3 closers in those first 15.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a little bit on the questionable side with all 3 of them. Not sure things with Munoz, Diaz, and Estevez. But if I'm going to go for the stats that some people say punt, I am never in favor of punting any stat. I'll just go ahead and put my cards on the table there. If you're going to go to saves early, and when those closers start running, and in this league, I know it from experience because this is my 4th year playing in the TGFBI. They're all going to go, and you're going to run out of opportunity. And if I'm going to go saves or steals early, I'm going to double down because I want to make sure that I'm finishing in the top 3 or 4 teams at least and have a good shot at it. So getting 3 closers, and then as you said, I've got Jaron Duran and Asturio Ruiz. Now, Duran is somebody I love. I think he's being underdrafted everywhere. I think it's because of the injury fall off at the end of last season. He was in the midst of a breakout, and I buy completely into it. He may be a guy that only hits you 10 or 12 homers at most, but I think he hits for a high average with 40 steal, 90 run potential. Asturio Ruiz, I believe I've caught a podcast from you guys where you were kind of ragging where his draft stock
I
was.
was, yeah.
However, we're
He
talking
fell.
about this is in the 160-ish range.
Yeah.
That's where I'm comfortable taking. I didn't think I would be taking him. I did look at him and skip over him a couple of times, but the ability to double him up with Duran and then have Jose Ramirez already on the roster, I'm thinking, okay, well, I'm setting a big time floor for steals. And it at 160, I'm good. But I think you were saying in the 120s, 130s, that's outrageous. And I'm with you on that. Don't do it.
Yeah, yeah, I don't remember the specifics, but yeah, I do remember, at least in our draft too. I want to say it was the 120s, but yeah, Asturi Ruiz, because I remember he sat near the top, for quite a while. Guys like him and Senga and Kenley Jansen, who there's been some questionable things, Kyle Bradish, where they were drafted really high in the first part of the draft season, and now
Sure.
things flare up and they fall. But Asturi Ruiz didn't have anything flare up. He just kind of, I think, been talked down a lot. A lot of people
Yeah.
were super high, and I think maybe some of the industry is kind of caught on to,
I
oh,
mean,
maybe he shouldn't be going
yeah,
as high
bad
as he is.
lineup. He's not going to,
Mhm.
I don't think he's going to hit for a high average. But I mean, who's going to ride? As far as elite, the elite of the elite steals guys, it's who would you say? Him, Acuna,
Him and
hopefully
Acuna,
that,
Corbin Carroll, maybe, but yeah, I think
and
both of them
then
are
De La Cruz,
somewhat
and that's
different.
about it.
Yep, yep. And to get that kind of value in the 11th round is pretty incredible.
Yeah. I guess
Um,
Bobby Witt Jr. is another that's up there. And I will, just to put this on that topic, I will say people are talking about, well, there's more steals now, there's more players to get steals from, so you don't pay up for them. I hear that to an extent, but at the same time, when a stat really elevates overall, then you got to get the elite of the elite, not just the good guys if you want to win that stat. And in this case, I don't go into a draft necessarily looking to win steals, but as the draft plays to you and you find yourself with those stolen base guys, I'm playing to win that stat if I'm going in heavy on it.
yeah, yeah, 100%. And like you said, I mean, just to jump back to the beginning, too, pairing Matt Olson and Jose Ramirez, I think that's a great, both of those guys could finish top 5 this year and nobody'd bat an eye. I think that's great value. I'm kind of jealous actually that you got that. And the more that I look at it, I'm like, oh, he did start off with a good one too there. I want to get your thoughts on a little bit of mine too. So I went again, Tatis, Burns. I don't usually go starter like one of the top line starters. I've actually broke quite a few rules of my own, including not going, for one of the top starters and not going for one of the top relievers. But I kind of felt like it was going to be worth it in this one because I think there's a lot of good value. At least you can tell by my draft. Once we get to the second half, I took 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pitchers in the last 9 rounds. So I like a lot of value in the back half of pitching. So I figured I'll hit it at the top a few times and then I'll go hitter heavy in the middle and close it out with a lot of pitching. So Tatis, Burns, Bichette, Hader, and then Gilbert. What are do you have any thoughts on some of those picks, or did you hate my start for my first 10 or 15?
Oh, absolutely not. I think Bichette is being underdrafted across the board. It's interesting because I kind of I didn't just discover him. I know who he is, but I've been lower on him than most of the industry the last couple of years. And now I'm seeing this guy is he's consistently hitting the counting stats like every year. And he's one of the few where I think the floor for a batting average is about as high as anyone except for like Arias or somebody like
Right.
that. That's a good value because I think, especially in a 15 team league like this, he should not be lasting outside the second round, in my opinion. Corbin Burns, obviously, his I don't I think maybe his wins total, his wins floor is higher now, but no
Yeah.
one chases wins. Every smart fantasy baseball player knows, okay, take a picture from a good team and maybe that'll help you out, but that is such a volatile, unpredictable stat. Who knows?
Mhm.
Um, he did take a little bit of a step back last season. Um, it's still though, he's top 3 pitching in Baltimore for sure, and I don't think that's a stretch specifically because this league, once the pitchers goes, as I was saying with the closers, and the same with the starters, once they go, it's like a virus everyone catches. You know,
Yeah.
maybe that's that might be the best metaphor, but it is what it is. And I would say Spencer Strider is the clear number one. That's not my Braves talking because I love Spencer Strider being a Braves fan, but I was critical of him a little bit last season in the fact that I wanted to see a third pitch out of him to avoid some of the home runs, and especially to the same-handed hitters. And I will say this, keeping up with Atlanta spring training, being down here, he's I would say developed a curveball, but apparently it was one he threw in the minors in college that he's now bringing back. And now, if he's got a third pitch that's even average,
Yeah.
forget it. I'm thinking prime Verlander comp, maybe even a Pedro Martinez style pitcher for us older guys that remember him pitching. Um, he's the clear number one. He's the
Yeah.
only one I would think about taking in the first round. But and who knows?
I,
I haven't read the latest on Garrett Cole's injury. Who knows? But
right.
Corbin Burns, Zach Wheeler, those are the next two for me for sure. And I think they're both. So we're talking 30 picks in the first two rounds here. That's perfectly justifiable.
Yeah, and I think I even heard today from some people that I listen to. They think now with Garrett Cole's injury, there's a chance that Spencer Strider, his stock only moves up, right? He could go into
Um,
top 5 picks in some drafts, maybe even top 3. His
yeah,
value just feels so much more increased because there's not as many top level guys, and you can pencil him in for almost 250 strikeouts, like
yeah,
health obviously permitting, but
yeah.
yeah, Spencer Strider, absolutely. And just as far as the build goes, I think so. I took Bichette in the 3rd round, and then a little bit later, I think I got a little crazy with the power. With I went Kyle Schwarber, Christian Walker, and then 2 rounds later, Cal Raleigh, and then 2 rounds after that, Jake Berger. So I definitely punted on some average there, but I felt like the floor with Tatis and at least his speed, and then the average that I'll get with Bichette would carry me through some of these struggles. And again, another thing that I felt like I can get later in the draft was maybe some average, which I think, a lot of people say don't chase that, which I understand. But, later I took Stephen Kwan. I think he's got a high floor. So I think I balanced it out okay. We'll see. Obviously, only time will tell. Were there any picks in that first 15 that you thought I would take this back? I would take this guy. When you saw someone go later, you're like, maybe I wish I would have done this instead. So was there anything, we may have touched on it just from talking before, but anything like that when you were drafting?
I I would say out of the guys you were just discussing, yeah, you did go for power, and that's a perfectly legitimate strategy once you see it, because sometimes you just have to let the draft come to you. It's like,
Yeah.
well, I had a plan coming in. That's not the way the draft fell to me, so I got to switch it up. And the ability to adjust on the fly like that often determines your success in a fantasy baseball draft. But Kyle Schwarber's not a guy I would normally target
Me
in it.
neither. 100%. I've
Yeah.
never had him on a team before, ever until this. But sorry, go ahead.
He's a guy I'll usually wait around the mid-seasons, like, especially in a roto style like this, like, okay, I need some homers. So let's go trade for him if somebody, and then rag that owner and say, he's batting 190. You don't need him. Hand him over.
Right.
And that's the problem is it's like, where's the trade-off? Where's the line? For me, it's like, could you just hit 230? Could you just do that? And I would draft you. But he is, I will say, Matt Olson was kind of that guy a couple of years ago. He's adjusted. I don't think Schwarber's going to make an adjustment to be a 270, 280 hitter
Yeah.
at any point in his career, but he is elite in one stat, and coming down, where we talking about the 6th round, that's not too bad. Christian Walker's a guy, I love that pick. I think he could, if Ketel Marte stays healthy this year, and he's got Corbin Carroll and Marte hitting in front of him, and now a little more protection, because I think Jock Peterson is very underrated,
Sure.
um, particularly against right-handed pitchers. And I think that is going to help protect Walker. I like that pick. Bryson Stott, I think, shocked everybody with the steals last year. He shocked me. So that's good value for him. I didn't think that he would have this high of draft status, but he surprised me overall. And he's one of those guys that when I look into the metrics, I'm like, he shouldn't be doing this. And then he does it. So at some point, you have to believe in it past what
Sure.
the percentages and things like that are telling you.
Okay. Yeah. I appreciate the kind words. I mean, yeah. I mean, I don't know if they're really kind, but I like the breakdown. Bryson Stott, I think, yes, he brings the speed, but one thing I am excited for him, I think there's a little bit more power in his bat as well.
The
I know
stadium
he
helps.
hits, yeah, the stadium helps. I know he hits the ball hard. And whoops, I closed it. Being on a team, maybe I was just in a Phillies mood, right? Being on a team with
Mm.
Schwarber, just it felt right at the time.
So point that out. I already said it with the Rangers, and now you with the Phillies here. Target those top 5 or 6 lineups. If you're questioning yourself about a pick and you got to pick between 2 players, it's almost never a bad move to go with the better, deeper lineup.
Yeah, it's good advice there. Let's look at the back half of the draft. So 16 through 20, we'll go back to your team here. 16, you took Christopher Sanchez. 17, Anthony Rizzo, which I'm excited to hear a little bit about. 18,
Think you're
Tyler
on the
Stevenson.
wrong line.
Oh, I am. I'm sorry. You're on McCaffrey. I was looking at
I was
McCaffrey.
like,
You're
"Oh,
right.
I've got Anthony Rizzo. I would
Thanks for
love
calling
that."
it out. Yeah, I would be curious to know. I want to invite McCaffrey on here now and see what he thinks. No, sorry about that. It's just right next to each other, and all the colors, it threw me off. So 16, you
Yeah.
went J.P. Crawford. 17, Austin Wells. 18, Brendan Donovan. 19, Jordan Hicks. 20, Michael Waka. 21 through 25, you went Lance Lynn, Jake Rogers, DJ LeMahieu, Javier Baez, and Kevin Biggio. And then 26 through 30, what Braves bias with Ronaldo Lopez, followed by Joey Meneses, followed by AJ Smith Shaver, followed by Mickey Moniak, and then Leover Peguero to close out your draft. So talk us through a little bit of the strategy without giving too much away, but what were you kind of thinking in those later rounds, and maybe walk us through some of your picks?
I will say, as far as you know, since you just brought it up, the Ronaldo Lopez, AJ Smith, Shaver. I mean, those are clearly late round dart throws
Yeah.
in a deep
Yeah.
draft like this. It's the Braves are going to have a fifth starter. I know they've sent Smith Shaver down now. It's probably between Ronaldo Lopez and Bryce Elder, at least at the time of recording. I don't have any more update than that. It's one of those two. That's a good team. I like both those guys. There's strikeout potential. Obviously, Ronaldo Lopez is one of a few guys around the leagues. I'm intrigued to see how they convert back from relieving to starting. But Ronaldo Lopez may end up in the Braves bullpen. He may end up a starter. That was just more trying to say, I think these guys have potential, and I'm trying to finish out a questionable staff. And like I said, I'm banking on Max Fried coming off an injury season, and then Yuri Perez to anchor this thing. Eduardo Rodriguez, I think, is underrated. Go back into my top half a little bit.
Yeah.
Nathan Eovaldi, obviously, got injury concerns every year. It's always something nagging with him, but I think that's decent value. Let's see it down, like you said, in my second half of the draft here. Michael Waka is somebody, and I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast here, I've got a late round pitcher article coming out of Just Baseball here soon, and Michael Waka is one of my favorite, I guess, sleeper pitchers, late round pitchers, because yeah, he may only throw 120, 130 innings, but it's tough to argue with the low 3 ERA over the last 2 years. It's hard to argue with a respectable whip, and you don't really think of him as a strikeout guy, but when I see a guy with ratios like that, who's a veteran, who continuously succeeds over 2 seasons like that, give me a strikeout rate over 20%. His over the last 2 years, I believe, is right in that 21, 22% range. That's a sleeper pitcher I really like. And Lance Lynn back in St. Louis, he had the strikeouts last year. Everything else was,
Horrible. Yeah.
here,
Right.
please hit this over the wall. And I think that's why he got so many strikeouts was guys literally trying to hit everything over the wall. But um, that's not that risky at that late. And he does have the strikeout upside, which I kind of looked at and said, how do I finish off a pitching staff that I'm even questioning myself? And it was give me some strikeout upside. And Jordan Hicks is another one of those reliever going back into a starter. He's in a great environment in San Francisco.
Yeah.
And the strikeout upside, I think, is there with him. One more guy I will, or two more actually, and these are infielders. I love DJ LeMahieu
Yeah.
on the bounce back this year. The top of the Yankees lineup, or at least that's what they're saying, that he's going to lead off. I've heard good things in spring training with him. He's not the batting title contender he used to be, but in that stadium with that lineup, it's not going to shock me if he scores 100 runs. That might be lofty, but it won't shock me. And J.P. Crawford, I kind of expect him to score 100 runs. And after last season, a big breakout for him. Maybe he doesn't repeat the 19 home runs. Um, that I don't think he had ever reached double digits before that, if memory serves. But him at the top of that Mariners lineup in front of Julio Rodriguez and his ability to get on base, and he showed last year that he had really matured as a hitter. I love his value outside the top 200. Pretty much everywhere I've seen, he's outside the top 200, and I love that at shortstop.
Yeah, I think every single one of your picks that you just dove into, I like the value on as well. The JP Crawford over 225. Yeah, that's, you know, even if he, like you said, if he doesn't repeat the home run total, you'll still take the amount of runs he'll give you. And like you said, I think he made some real improvements as a hitter, which are going to translate into this year. So very excited to see him. The one
And
I
with
am,
his glove, he's staying on the field.
yeah, right. Exactly. And the Mariners are only really getting better on offense. I think they've done a lot of things this offseason to improve that. So I'm excited to see what
Polanco is
they roll out.
another sleeper for
Yeah.
me.
Yeah. The one I was wondering, so Jordan Hicks, a lot of people are concerned, obviously reliever to starter. We see it with a few guys, right? AJ Puck is doing it already this spring as well. Are you worried with the injury at all, right? Like Jordan Hicks has had problems staying on the field. Was that something in the back of your mind as you were drafting this late?
It as I said, it was more just I've got to
Strikeout
get
upside.
some pitchers with some potential in
Sure.
this because it had gotten away from me with I really focused heavy on offense here and like okay, this is late enough, which we're talking 15, 16, 17, 18th round in a draft this deep. It's I'm willing to take that shot on a guy with his arm in that stadium, which at that stadium to me is worth what point 0.2, point 0.3 on your ERA at
Right.
least. And he really impressed me last season. I don't know how many innings they'll expect out of him. The Giants manage things differently anyway. We'll see how they do this year. Um, if he gives you, as I said with Waka, if he can get to 125 innings, that may be really lofty, but I think it'll pay off more than it hurts you. Maybe his whip balloons, but I'm not expecting him to carry his staff. It's more of who do you want to finish off? Because I like to make sure I've got at least 7 starters when I leave a draft. And if
Mhm.
he's your 6th or 7th guy, I'm okay with that. And that's an easy drop and replace in
Right.
most
Right.
leagues.
Yeah, I also want to say too, I love the back to back. You went DJ LeMahieu and Javier Baez on that quick little turn. Um, Big DJ LeMahieu fan, especially at that price, leading off for hopefully one of the better offenses in
Yeah.
baseball, at least maybe top half, right? And to
At
get
least
him in,
power.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Hopefully, if Judge can stay healthy, um, yeah, I think that was tremendous value in the 23rd, and then the 24th. People write off Javier Baez, and I understand why. He's been so atrocious for 2 years. But the one thing I like, and so as a Cubs fan, right, I watched Baez for many years,
Oh, for
and
sure.
he's one I also have never had any shares of. No Schwarber, no Baez. I've had one share of Chris Bryant in my lifetime. So for some reason, I just don't end up landing on a lot of these former Cubs, but I like the value at Baez. And I'm one, so I believe Baez is, and everyone else who's watched baseball with him, he is such an emotionally driven player.
Yeah.
And, maybe this is just me looking past the metrics and, doing whatever I can to try to find value. But I think the fact that the Tigers are getting better, I think that's only going to make Javier Baez more inspired to play better because for now he still has a spot, right? For now he's still playing terrific defense and we see a lot of young talent coming up with that Detroit lineup. So I wouldn't be surprised if I'm not expecting him to return back to what he was, but I certainly think that when you're getting him in around 23, 24, I think that that's tremendous value because there's still something there. There's still a lot of power. He's just got to, I think, unlock it a little bit more. So I love that pick.
Yeah, and like you said, with the glove, he's staying on the field. With the contract, I can't imagine
Yep.
that. I mean,
Yep.
and it's more like I saw myself with one shortstop. That was like the position, if you want to say punt or waited on it. I just didn't take one.
Sure.
And JP Crawford, because I was waiting on JP Crawford because homework in, I knew he was staying late. I was hoping he would, and then got him pretty much where I wanted him. I had to have somebody back up that position. And
Sure.
Javier Baez, even though as you said, he's forgotten how to play baseball. Somewhere in there is a former MVP candidate, and
Yeah.
I don't expect that either. But if he could give me 15 homers, 15 steals, and play all the time, I'll fill him in. And you got a middle infield spot.
Yep.
It's not somebody I'm going to rely on, but it's definitely somebody I'm going to take later in the draft. And Kevin Biggio, he's kind of another. I just wanted to cover positions,
Hmm.
and I think Toronto's going to play him. I was big on him when he was first coming into the league. Pedigree, obviously, but he looked like a big league player, and then a couple of years of just head scratching results. And
Right.
last year, he kind of bounced back a little bit. I think even if he's only playing in a platoon, but he plays multiple positions. Um, I think he's worth it in the late rounds, particularly with flexibility in a format like this. Some of my favorite values, just to get back to the end there, though, is uh, Joey Meneses. I realize he only qualifies as utility in some places, um, but if you're playing NL only, you're playing deep leagues. This guy just rakes. And I mean, yes, he's in Washington. Last year, the homers he only hit 13, but he's not gonna hurt you in batting average. He's gonna drive in. He drove in 89 last season. Um, when you're talking about Abrams and company up at the top of that lineup, the Nationals, I don't expect them to be good, but they've got good table setters for a guy like Meneses who makes a lot of contact and a lot of line drives. He's an RBI sleeper for me, so I love that there. And Mickey Moniak is the guy that man, you talk about strikeouts to walks. I don't even want to bring him up. It's not worth talking about, but I have to say, the guy blisters the baseball, and the Angels want to lead him off. And being a Braves fan, watching Ron Washington the last few years, when he
Yeah.
talks, I listen.
Yeah.
And I think he could be a big shock. He shocked me last season because everybody was just kind of like, this guy was drafted number one, like 20 years ago, right? He's going to do nothing. And yeah, he may strike out 300, 400 times, but when he makes contact, things happen.
It's going to be a really, yeah, he's going to hit the ball very, very hard. I did want to say too, I hope it didn't sound like I was upset or kind of off with your Ronaldo Lopez and AJ Smith-Shawver
Oh,
giving
no,
you
no, no, no.
the Brave sack, but I think those are great values. So, like you mentioned, Smith-Shawver has been sent down. He's not going to start the year with the team, but
Yep.
Ronaldo Lopez still has a chance to win that fifth starter job. And I am in the camp of, if he goes back to that middle relief role, if he doesn't win the fifth starter job or whatever the case is, I still think there's potential value there, especially being on a team
Absolutely.
like the Braves. You could steal some wins in that category. He throws 4 innings for, someone starts off rough and, oh, hey, the Braves are still going to score 15 runs. Look at that. Somebody's
Yep.
got to get a win. I think Ronaldo Lopez is a phenomenal pick there. And one I'm kind of upset I didn't consider a little bit more.
And to
Um,
be frank about the Braves staff, just watch them down here. I'll try to be as objective as I can. I think they have the potential with the guys on the staff to be the best rotation in baseball. At the same time, you're talking about Chris Sale. Everybody knows what the track record there is with health. One of the best pitchers of his era, period.
yeah.
That's not even debatable, but can he stay out there? How many innings is he going to give? Charlie Morton is a very good pitcher as well, 40 years old. Max Fried, we've already said a couple times, he missed half of last season or more. Um, Even if these Braves pitchers aren't starting, the Braves know they need 7 or 8 starters, and most teams know that, but then they act like they don't, and the Braves act like they do this year. And yeah, I'm with you, Ronaldo Lopez. I think the way the Braves are paying him as well. I mean, they gave
Yeah.
him a big contract for a guy who's been a setup man, middle reliever. It's like 3 years, 30 million, I believe, off the top of my head. Um, they're paying him like a prime contributor. He's going to throw 80 innings minimum. I would be shocked if he didn't, barring an injury.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. And if nothing else too, like you said, sometimes, and I say this all the time, if you're between two players, bet on the organization, and the Braves clearly know what to do with pitching. Ronaldo Lopez has shown some flashes in the past of being a very, very good pitcher. So maybe the Braves, sprinkle some of the fairy dust on him like the Rays
Mhm.
do oftentimes, or, we
Oh, yeah.
see some of these good pitching organizations do. Were there any picks that you weren't crazy about? I know we talked up a lot of your picks, but were there any that maybe you would have taken back? I know, I still think that second half you did phenomenal, especially once we dove into it a little
Even
bit. But what do you
even though we
think? Yeah,
defended Baez,
sure,
he was not on my radar at all. I queued him up shortly before I took him, just being like, I've got to have, as I try to back up all positions. And this league, the way the waivers get, and what we're talking about fab here, um, it gets competitive week to week in this TGFBI. So I want to back up every position I can, and he's a guy I think you'll get more than zero from him. So, but
sure.
certainly wasn't a guy I was targeting. Even though we talk up the positive upside of Jordan Hicks, he's not necessarily somebody I was targeting. Um, Past
Can I
that,
can I ask why? So you went Javier Baez, and then about a round, 2 rounds later, went Orlando Arcia. As a Braves guy, no Orlando Arcia, you went Baez over him. Any reason for that? I mean, Arcia was an all-star last year, right? So
he
what
was,
were your thoughts there?
and what's funny is he helped me win some leagues last season because I drafted him when everyone's talking Von Grissom, everyone's talking other guys around Atlanta. I had a sneaking suspicion it was going to be him. I had a suspicion it was going to be him when the Braves originally traded for him and still had Dansby Swanson. You said you're a Cubs fan, so you know how that went down.
Yep, yep.
Um, it. I think Orlando Arcia is a solid player. He's a solid glove at shortstop. His bat really tailed off last season. I think we saw his ceiling um, early in the first half last season. I'm a fan as a Braves guy, but there's no stolen base potential there. And honestly, that was the main thing giving Baez an edge over him because I've built kind of a team where I need to really compete heavily in stolen bases. So Baez could help there more than Arcia will. The home run potential, all the potential is for Javier Baez to beat him in every stat, maybe except for average. I don't know if that'll happen. Um,
Right.
at the same time, it's I looked at Arcia as you brought it up. I was looking at him. The other thing of it is, I don't know if the Braves are sold on him to be the
Sure.
starting shortstop. I think he will be on opening day, but if he continues to struggle with the bat as he did late last season, I think you could see other guys in Atlanta playing shortstop.
Sure. Anyone in particular? I'm having drawn a blank on who that might be.
Um, there
They
there's
have
some
Diorme, David
minor league
Fletcher.
prospects. We're not very I mean,
Okay.
Von Grissom was that guy, and Von Grissom is a far cry defensively at shortstop. I
Yeah.
don't think
Yeah.
he's a big league shortstop at all, and that's what led mostly to the trade. The Braves didn't have a place to put Von Grissom. And then the ability to get a guy like Sale after him with the upside potential there, that was too much to not take for Alex Anthopoulos down here. But there's some minor league guys. Maybe they go outside the organization. It's the one spot
Sure.
that's a big question mark for the Braves for me.
And actually, one that I just thought of too. I wouldn't be surprised if the Brewers are shopping around Willie Adames. He, I think, would be a great fit for you guys there too.
Yeah,
Ton of bounce back potential with him as well.
yeah.
Um, and then the one other name I wanted to ask is Jose Caballero went in the 27th round as well. Was he another one that you thought of potential starting shortstop for the Tampa Bay Rays? Do you know much about him? Are you bought on him being the
I
starting shortstop for the year? Because he
I
brings speed
love
too.
I love Tampa Bay Rays pitchers, as you've already said. I
Sure.
love getting as many of them as I can at the right price because they just work magic with one pitcher after another. With hitters, there's select ones. Like I love Yandy Diaz this year because I don't think he's going to fall victim to the platoon as they do.
Yeah. Right.
And it's really just comes when you're talking, especially roto style leagues like this. It's who is going to get the plate appearances. I'm all about a strong side of a platoon, and then with young guys, they also they'll bounce them around and they'll leave them in the minors. They're just very volatile with the way trying to project their hitters fantasy wise outside of, as I said, like a Yandy Diaz, a Rosarena. Other than that, I'm not targeting raised bats. I do like Paredes, but again, we're talking about a guy who could have the bat taken out of his hand for a third of the games. That's really why I don't look for very many Tampa Bay Ray bats.
Sure. Okay. I like the breakdown. Thank you for doing that. And I know I put you on a spot for a few of those few of those players, but just wanted to kind of get your off the top thinking and um, yeah, so kind of see what your thoughts were with building. We'll go through mine real quick. Mine's not as important as yours. I was really excited to get to some of yours. But 16 through 20, I took Luis Campusano as my second catcher, and then Parker Meadows, Colt Keith, Sal Frelick, and Tim Anderson. Followed 21 through 25, I went Kyle Manzardo, Eric Fetty, Joe Boyle, Matt Manning, and Ahmed Rosario. And then 26 through 30, I went Willier Abreu, Tyler McGill, Bryce Elder, Kyle Gibson, and Jose Urquidy. Just real quick, some of the picks that I like, just reading back to it, I'm a huge Parker Meadows fan. I just talked up Detroit a little bit. I think Detroit's going to be a much better team this year, and I think he's going to stick. I think he's got, plenty of power, plenty of speed to offer, and I think he's only going to get better. I think the fact that he didn't have such a great surface stat year last year led me to kind of think his value is just only, it's not great. I got him, let's see, 17. So almost 250, about 250 at draft 250 price. So love that value with Parker Meadows there. Another one that I think is, I know you just said you don't target them. I think Ahmed Rosario is going to get quite a bit of run with the Tampa Bay Rays this year. They just signed him this offseason, and he's played really well this spring. I know it's been a short sample, and I don't have his numbers in front of me. Maybe I should have, but just thinking aloud, like he's had a phenomenal spring. They've thrown him out in right field quite a bit. I could see him bouncing around, getting a super utility role. And, he may not get 600 plate appearances, but I think 5 is realistic with how much they're rotating in guys. And if he has one of the hotter bats, which I think is certainly possible with some of the guys, Caballero, there's a chance that he doesn't hit, right? And he falls victim. And now look at that. We have a shortstop ready to play. So, and then diving into some of the pitchers, I went real pitching heavy. Like I said, 7 of my last 9. Eric Fetty is one I'm throwing a few darts on around a couple leagues, and I felt like that was good value for him. And Joe Boyle, this is definitely one I reached for. He's definitely a spring training darling. We'll see if he has really made some gains or if those are just fantasy or a mirage of sorts. So for anyone who doesn't know, too, Joe Boyle was throwing it. I want to say it was a 16% walk rate. And yes, you heard that right. A 16% walk rate in the minor leagues. That is like atrocious video game. That's worse than every major leaguer. But he throws good stuff. He's got great pitching, great pitches, good secondaries, everything like that. Just reining in the walk rate. And the reason why I liked him is I watched a couple of his starts and he didn't walk anyone for the first few starts, and I was really psyched. And then I picked him up. I'm like, okay, if there's even like a little bit of a gain in his control, he's going to be well worth this pick. And then his next outing, he walked 3, I think, in an inning. So, maybe he's one of those guys that I'm streaming if I see he's got playing a bad team, or if it doesn't work out, I can drop him. I'm not too worried about that, especially like you said, some of these late round picks. I'm expecting to drop most of them, right? Especially these pitchers. Yeah. I'm expecting a lot of them to not work out, but I think there's some upside. Matt Manning, Tyler McGill, Bryce Elder, all potential dudes who can contribute. Not expecting them, to come out and be aces, but at the same time, those innings can be valuable. And if you're streaming or trying to find the right matchups, I think that they can bring a lot of value. What are your thoughts on some of my second round or second half draft thoughts?
I've got a good bit of I've got a good number of thoughts because basically I think you went through my sleeper articles as of late and just drafted everybody off of them. Especially the first 5 you were talking about there, so round 16 through 20. Campusano is a guy I've been recommending at catcher, especially in the 2 catcher format. I really like what he did last season. I think there's more of that to come. The San Diego lineup is everybody's down on them. It makes sense. They traded away Soto. I get it. They're not as talent loaded as they were. They're still got a good lineup. And Campusano is going to have the ability to hit for a high average, drive in a good number of runs, I believe. I gave you the thumbs up on Parker Meadows. I can't really add anything. I'm right there with you. You took another Detroit prospect right after that, and Colt Keith. I'm all about that. They're going to play him, and I like the bat. I was writing about him back in January being one of my, breakout prospects. Frelick's a question mark for me in Milwaukee, but I do like the talent. I just want to see him play. I want to see him have a set role. Tim Anderson is obviously a sleeper. Everyone's down on. What's the risk? I mean, the guy hits over 300 for what was it, 4 straight seasons, and then last season injured and falls off. And the metrics have never really been in his favor, but he makes it work. He's a good athlete. He's got speed, and the Marlins are going to play him. Manzardo, that's a great prospect right there. I think we see him Memorial Day at the latest, maybe in June. This brings me to the real one, though, that I want to get your thoughts on because I think they reflect mine. I'm buying the Eric Fetty thing. And Chicago needs innings. I mean, they're
Yeah.
rebuilding. That rotation needs innings. We saw a guy with a near 6 ERA in the major leagues goes over to Asia, throws in I believe it was the MVP of the KBO.
He was.
If
He
not,
was.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And I mean, he's back with says he's got a different approach. I was reading up on it because, as I said, he's a big time sleeper for me. I don't think you should waste a lot of draft capital on him. You didn't. This is the right place to take him. I think as long as he's healthy, the White Sox are going to try to get 200 innings out of him. If he gives you, if he can even, split the difference between his former major league ERA to his ERA from over in Korea, sub 4 ERA with decent strikeouts, that's a good pick. So obviously you're buying into him too.
Yeah, 100%. And like you said, he's going to get some run with the White Sox, right? They don't have, other than Dylan Cease right now, who knows how long he's going to be on the White Sox for. They don't have many pulses out there, right? And so the one too. So Kyle Manzardo, you said he comes up Memorial Day. I actually drafted him thinking he's going to make the team. But is he not? Is there something? Because I see on
You
Roster
think so?
Resource.
For me, I've just kind of had that in my head going back,
Sure.
even a couple months now. I was like, okay, I think he's gonna be a breakout. I think it's probably May, but maybe he does.
I hope so. If I'm waiting till May, I think then that pick was probably not where I would have gone. I think he brings that batting average upside that I said I was chasing a little bit later. If he's not coming up till May, I'm probably waiting a couple more rounds for him because I see Roster Resource has him as the first baseman and then Josh Naylor playing or at DH, and so that was kind of my thought and my hope. They give him less than a 50% chance to play first base, but he is penciled in as the first baseman, at least for now. So I was trusting what they wrote. And if he's up, I think he definitely is going to be a contributor and someone who will balance out my my early power of, Schwarber, Walker, Raleigh, and Berger, because I'm going to need some
Oh, I love
balance
the
at the
bat.
back of that. Yeah. Yeah.
I love the
So,
bat.
and then we talked briefly about Bryce Elder potentially winning the fifth starter job. Is there anything? So obviously you're a little bit more of a Braves insider than I am. Do you like Bryce Elder at that price, and do you think he's got a realistic shot of delivering some value either as a fifth starter or another role?
It's really tough. I've had this argument with many Braves fans, friends around here, and I was criticizing him halfway through last season when he was making all-star teams. I'm like, the kid is pitching great. I love it. He's really helping stabilize the rotation. It's not going to last. I kept saying that midsummer last season, like it's not going to last. He's not going to be able to hold up this way. The effectiveness is not going to continue if he doesn't change something. And he was dreadful in the second half. And then the playoffs, not much better. I'm all for him improving. I will never dog guys. I'm going to cheer for
Right.
Braves pitchers. I don't think he has the upside of a Smith Shawver, Ronaldo Lopez, even a Hurston Waldrop that
Yeah.
I believe is up at some point this summer. I also think Elder's not going to hurt you. I think he can give you some wins. I think that with a couple of adjustments, attacking the zone a little more, he can give you a decent ERA like he did last season for the most part. The whip's going to be a little high. You basically took no risk at where he's drafted, and that's exactly where I would draft him. In fact, I probably would have taken him if you wouldn't have, just to have all three of those Braves and make sure I had the fifth
One
starter
of them.
coming
Right.
coming out of camp. And it actually frustrated me a little bit. I didn't get that third one because I think he's most likely just because of what he proved last season. Um, so yeah, I do. If I had to say, he's probably most likely to get a start early in the season. Um, but he's an easy drop if he doesn't stick.
Right. And again, that was my thought with a lot of these guys. Tyler McGill's another one who's had a good spring, who I'm thinking, maybe gets some impact. And again, if he doesn't, I have no intention of holding on to all of these pitchers. Kyle Gibson's another one. Like, I expect to maybe drop and pick him up a few times this year. He may have some bad stretches, but he may have some stretches where he's looking really good. And, you know what you're going to get from him.
I always end up owning him on a team every year. It never fails because he's like, okay, well, here's the streaming week for Kyle Gibson.
Yep.
Here's the
Yep.
guy who's always pitching, always giving innings. He's not terrible, but he's not good. At the same time, I expect a big bounce back from the Cardinals this year. And
Mhm.
they've just collected veteran pitchers. They know Goldschmidt and Arenado, that combo is not going to last forever. The time is going to catch up to them, and this is their year. I think they bounce back and win that division. You probably don't want to hear that,
No, I don't.
but 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 I do think they bounce back. I do think the Cubs are in it, to be honest with you.
Sure, sure.
Um, at the same time, but they're collecting veterans for a reason. They're making a run right now. The last season, I don't think anybody expected that drop off from the Cardinals.
Yeah.
And I think Kyle Gibson could benefit pitching there in that division, in that stadium. And yeah, I was looking at him as a possibility. If I wouldn't have been able to pick up a guy like Lance Lynn or Michael Walker a few rounds before, he's a guy I would have fallen back on.
Yeah, and those Lance Lynn, Michael Wacha picks, when you were doing that, I was doing my Tim Anderson, Kyle Manzardo. So I was doing my average play while you were going for your strikeout play. Um, yeah, and I hate to hear it. You're absolutely right. I don't want the Cardinals to be. I liked how they played last year. That was fun. I enjoyed that. No, and this could be a whole nother episode. Obviously, you talk about different divisions and stuff like that. But I do, maybe it's a little bit of the bias, but I do think the Cubs are borderline. I think it's very close, but I think they're the most complete team. And I think they have the fewest overall question marks. Obviously, the Cubs still have a
Yeah.
big third base hole, and they got some pitching. The back end of that rotation, we're not 100% sure who's going to pitch, but I like the Jordan. I'm kind of upset I didn't take Jordan Wicks or look at Jordan Wicks in this league, because I think he would have been
If
kind
he
of in
was a
that.
sure thing for the rotation, I was taking him. But I
And
was
he
like,
looks
come on.
he looks phenomenal so far this spring. He
Yeah.
would have been where my Tyler McGill, maybe even Matt Manning was, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think there's some potential there. We'll see how it plays out. There's obviously a ton
I
of
will say,
baseball to.
I was out on the Cubs until they brought Bellinger back. That was
Yep.
big.
Oh, 100%. That was my big kind of push over the top, because I do think some of the young guys see some time this year. I love the Craig Counsell. I think that's an underrated part of it
Oh,
too.
for sure. For sure.
So yeah, there's. I think the Brewers are going to be good. I think the Pirates are going to be better than
Yeah.
people expect. I think the Reds, obviously, I just think that's a fun
And
division. Nobody's run away with it like the
one
NL
one more
East.
nod your way. You mentioned him again. Matt Manning is a guy I think is a sleeper breakout. Because I'm with it's talking about Central Divisions, American League Central. You mentioned this. I think the Tigers are much improved, and I think that young talent, along with some guys they've added, Kenta Maeda is another guy I really like this season, and
Jack
Manning, as I
Flaherty.
said, it, Flaherty. That's a tough one to gauge.
Yeah.
It's like it's in there, but can he sustain it? That's the
Right.
question. But I do think he helps that
Mhm.
younger pitchers get there, and they've got an ace in Skubal, which let's see it over the whole season. I'm not
Yep.
totally up where everybody else is, but he helped win me some leagues last season where I drafted and stashed him. And that ended up being, I'll go ahead and say it, that was my smartest move of my drafts last season, draft and stash on Tarek Skubal. So don't, and I think people sleep on those central divisions because they're
Yeah.
both, I would say they're each the weakest in the
Mhm.
leagues, and teams as much as I said, target good lineups. Don't fall asleep on the bad ones either, especially when it comes to closers. People want to avoid closers on bad teams. That's where you get the value.
Yeah. Yeah.
Carlos Estevez is my guy for that.
Yeah, he's another one I didn't point out, because I think too a lot of people were worried about the addition of Robert Stevenson. Is that something? So you think Estevez, takes it and runs with it? I know.
I'm going on the word from what
Yeah.
the Angels brass is saying. They say it's him. Um, I would have liked to handcuff him with Stevenson. Didn't get the chance, but if drafting in another league, if you can take the two together, those setup men that could become closers, those are winning picks in the final couple rounds of a lot of drafts too.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Last thing before we kind of go, I did want to ask, and I don't know if you've looked around at all. Were there any picks throughout the draft that you were like, "Oh, that was a really good value," not on either my team or your team? Were there any teams or any picks at one spot where you're like, "Oh, that was a really good value," or "I should have thought about this guy a little bit more"?
You
Do
know,
you have any thoughts on that?
it's a little difficult when you're doing the slow draft because you're not always. I mean, you do go back and look, but sometimes you're not on. It's not like being in a draft room. Where you're like, okay, 2.5 hours and we're done. Everybody's paying attention to everybody's picks, but so it's a little bit more difficult to stay right on top of it from that stretch. I will say, I've been this preseason, I've been writing a load of sleeper and then value based drafting type articles for both just baseball and fantasy pros. Um, Trey Turner, if you want to go to the first round, he's a guy, man. It, I was going to take him at 14. I had my eyes at pick 14 on Matt Olson, but Trey Turner went 13th. I mean, I'm sorry, the guy. I get how bad he was for a lot of let's say May, June, July last season, but he was Trey Turner that everybody knows
And
and loves.
some,
And
yeah.
yeah, exactly. This guy was MVP caliber. He could be the number one player, and he was being drafted as the number one player in most places last season. He hasn't forgotten how to play. It was in a new big city where, I mean, the fans are very kind and supportive when you're slumping in Philadelphia, as everyone knows. And I'm being sarcastic, but um, with that, I mean, he turned it on and was raking at a level maybe never before seen from him. That's a guy I love the value there with him dropping down into some other rounds. I, I've been on this train for a couple years too. I think Manny Machado's going too low.
Yeah.
Is and again, it's one of those situations where if you got a guy who you believe is elite and then he only puts up good stats, it disappoints people and then they think he's terrible. It's like, no, that is an overcorrection. And he's a guy to me that's an easy top 40 pick. Easy. And he should not fall outside that. That's There are those that disagree. I just think it's a set 30-90 with a decent batting average. And if you can give me that floor, then I'm taking it much higher than a lot of people are this season.
Yeah, and so in the draft that Rami and I are in right now, he's had some, we'll call it's user errors for sure, right? Rami, it's his first time using Fantrax, and he tried to go on auto, and he ended up drafting Adley Rutschman in the first round, and then it swung right back around and gave him Will Smith. So clearly not what he was hoping for. But when I went back and reversed it, a couple guys were cleared out of his queue, and he wanted Freddie Freeman, and he ended up with Trey Turner, and he was all up in arms. He was angry at me. How could you let this happen? I said, first of all, user error. It was on you. I don't know what to tell you. But second of all, how are you going to be mad about getting Trey Turner? I'm not 100. Like, I get it, Freddie. He's got. We all know what we're going to get from Freddie. Obviously, right? He could hit 330 and in one of the best lineups in baseball, right in the middle of it. But Trey Turner, like you said, could be the number one
Mhm.
overall fantasy player, and he has that potential, and I think he has that floor too. Like, he's got the floor of
Yes.
a top 25 player. He's that good, and
Yeah.
being in one of the best offenses in baseball as well.
I did
Also
hear
helps.
that debate on that particular podcast, and I was like, the whole time I was thinking Trey Turner should be ahead of Freddie Freeman. I mean, I don't think Freddie he should be taken in the top 10 picks for sure. But I'm like, no, you got the better player, and I think if you give it 3 or 4 months, you actually won't be as upset about this.
Thank you. We're gonna have to bring you on next time Rami and I are on, so that you could tell him that too. The only one I had quite a few that I was thinking of. I liked. I don't know how to pronounce some of these, players' names. Couillard, team number 9. I liked his Zach Littell pick in the 24th round. I think Littell's got quite a bit to offer, and Lodolo going a couple picks after that. I think that's great value on Lodolo. But the one that I was going to point out was Brandon Fott going at the 25 to 227 in the 15th round. I think that's phenomenal value. He's one that, obviously last year in the beginning was quite a bit of a struggle for him. He was sent back down uh, after a couple months of not performing, which, because last year at this time last year, he was being drafted as kind of one of those guys who's going to come up and, really kind of take over and be one of these next young stud pitchers. And didn't work out for him, but he went back down. And when he came back up right before, or a couple months before the playoffs, he looked legit. And so, we saw him throw quite a few innings last year. I don't think that the innings are going to be a concern. So, if he's even half as good as he was, right? Again, another guy, if he even splits the difference, which I don't think is the case, I think he's more the second half than he was the first half. But even if he splits the difference at pick 227, I think that was good value for Genstad, whoever Genstad
Absolutely.
is.
It,
Um,
it and then I mentioned the article I've got coming out for Just Baseball talking about late round pitchers. He's at the very top of it.
Love it.
It is it is and it's exactly like you said. And as far as the stamina, I don't think I mentioned that in the article. Yeah, he threw 167 innings in 2022. He threw 156 last season altogether, and then he pitched in the playoffs, and his best pitching was in the playoffs. I mean, I think he scuffled a bit in his first outing, but he settled down, and he's a guy that could be a top 40 pitcher, and he's not being drafted that way. So, yes, if you're looking for the upside play, and I have noticed over at Fantasy Pros where I keep up with consensus ADP around the league, he is moving up, at least in recent days here, coming into recording this.
Sure.
Um, it's moving up. So I don't even know if you would have gotten him that late, but he's worth the top 150. That might be stretching a little bit. And as far as his ADP, it's still sitting outside of 200. So he's one of the best values anywhere for me, regardless of position.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. Nate, is there anything else? I want you to plug your stuff before we go, but is there anything else on the draft or the whole experience that you want to touch on before we head on out of here?
Well, there's a reason this is one of the most well known, most highly participated in competitions around the fantasy industry. TGFBI, Justin Mason, he does a great job organizing this whole thing, and it's a lot of fun. These slow drafts can be unnerving at times if you've never done one. Um, it's a test in patience, and I'll just leave it at that. But yeah, these are a lot of fun. I mean, and we've broken down quite a bit here, so there's nothing really sticks out to me as far as that needs to be further touched on.
Well, Nate, I definitely kept you past what I had originally anticipated, and so I apologize for that. But I really appreciate you
Oh, we
sticking
can
on
go
with
another
us.
hour if you like.
I'd love to, but I got to run to the bath. I actually think I'm up in two of my leagues right now, at least. Probably another one, maybe three. So I got to make sure that I'm not the person holding up these drafts. But before you go, can you plug some of your stuff? Where can people find your writing, your
Oh
your
yeah,
whatever you're doing?
follow me at the Twitter handle right down there at Miller_RotoDad. Um, I'm writing at Fantasy Pros, writing at Just Baseball. So far, I've had an article coming out about once a week over here. Um, yeah, that's about it for me.
Well, Nate, thank you very much for coming on. I really appreciate it. Please, everyone who's watching, like, subscribe, follow, do all those, YouTube things, and appreciate your time. And we'll see you back here for our next episode. Thanks.
Absolutely.